So welcome. My name is Emily Henkels. I am from String Theory Yarn Company, and tonight I have the privilege of chatting with Tanya Thomann, the genius behind MayBea Crafted, and we have a trunk show going on right now of MayBea Crafted yarn. And so Tanya has agreed to sit with us and talk a little bit about the process of making this wonderful Michigan yarn. So I will let her take it away.
Thanks, Emily. I'm super excited to be here, and I think that the conversation that we have tonight will be a little bit different than with some of the other trunk shows you've had, because the conversation probably is about like process of how to put color on a yarn or inspiration for colors. And what I think is interesting is that is interesting to me, but our yarn is really about community and about connectedness. And so I just want to share with you where the yarn comes from, where our inspiration comes from. And while my name is the name on the business MayBea Crafted, you'll hear me refer to our and we quite a bit, because it really is a bit of a collective. A lot of women's hands have touched the yarn before it gets to folks. I told Emily earlier I was going to do my best to speak as though I was on the Gilmore Girls. So if I'm going super fast, maybe slow the video down a little bit or rewind and listen again if something I say doesn't make a lot of sense. So about a dozen years ago now, it seems, I met, well, probably longer than that, I met a woman named Mary at a festival that I attended. I was teaching some fiber workshops. She wanted to learn how to use fiber differently. She had a small flock of sheep, felt like the wool was of pretty high quality, but wasn't quite sure what to do with it. So over a couple of years, we chatted. And then my friend Carla, who was a dyer, an indie dyer, she and I were talking about what it would be like to have a more artisanal yarn, something that was unique and not commercially available that every dyer might have. And this was a little bit before Clara Parks wrote her book, The Vanishing Fleece, and had the Great Bale Project. But right around in that same time frame. So breed specific yarns were not a thing. Farm yarns were really only found at festivals. So we thought it would be something unique and different, and a way that Carla could expand her business. So we met Mary at a festival, the Michigan Fiber Festival in Allegan, Michigan, which is not far from where Mary's farm is. Stuck our heads into a couple of bags of yarn that she brought to us in the back of her pickup and said, we'll take them, and then sent them off to have them spun into yarn. But let me show you a little bit about what that yarn looks like and tell you a little bit about her sheep. So when we get the wool, it looks like this. So this is the white sheep. You can see there's a lot of dirt and poop, and not so much poop because the yarn is skirted, but you can see it's a very creamy color when it comes off the sheep. She also has a few black sheep. So you can see that deep, dark black wool. And you'll notice, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, it has some orange tips to it. So much like how our hair might get sun bleached in the sun, Mary's sheep are just out living their best lives in a former pear orchard and running from tree to tree to eat all of the pears as they drop off the trees in the fall. And their hair is lightened just as ours would be if we spent the summer outside. Also, much like human hair, the black sheep, the older they get, their hair starts to change color too. So that we have this, what we call silver as well. So as the sheep age, those black sheep age, that color changes too. So we really have sort of a gradient of natural wool colors that we have. And you can probably see it best on this white wool. Hopefully you can see it. You can see that it's got a nice crimp to it, but it's really fine. It's a fine little crimp. So Mary's sheep are not a purebred sheep. They're not Blueface Leicester, and they're not Romney, but it's a cross. So she has a Blueface Leicester ram, and actually a couple of Blueface Leicester rams, and her ewes are Romney. And so her wool really gets the best qualities of both of those breeds. So Romney is a long wool, has a nice luster to it. It has some strength to it. Blueface Leicester, or BFL, you'll hear it referred to. It has a nice curl to it that gives it some nice spring that we like as knitters, that things can spring back into shape after they've been washed and blocked. And it also wears really well. So those two breeds together make a really beautiful wool. And Mary breeds for meat. So she wants something that's going to have multiple births, but it is also going to be a size that she can manage. And this wool for her became value-added agriculture, that her primary income was from the butchering, but she wanted an extra bit of money for the wool. It's an interesting business to be in as a farmer. In the tri-state area, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, there used to be a wool co-op, and about a year ago that closed. So farmers used to be able to sell, after the sheep were shorn in the spring, they could sell hundreds of pounds of wool to the co-op. The co-op would keep it for about a year or so, and then a year later, the shepherd would get a flock. The 1 year in the last 10 or so that we did not purchase wool from Mary was in 2020. She sold about 150 pounds of wool to the co-op. And I'll let you just ponder what that might have cost. Emily, do you have any thoughts about what she would have gotten back from the co-op for about 150 pounds of wool?
I have no idea.
So a hand spinner, maybe a hand spinner sitting and listening to this is going to say, well, it's a co-op. Maybe they didn't get paid that much. Maybe a couple dollars a pound. A hand spinner is going to pay anywhere from $7 to $15 to $20 a pound, depending on the breed. Mary got $5 and some change back for 150 pounds of wool, not per pound, but for all of it. So you can imagine that shepherds are not making a lot of money on their wool. It's not even enough to pay to have them shorn. So Mary loves that we purchase the wool. We pay her a much more fair wage for that. It covers essentially the cost of shearing the sheep for us. And then we send it off to a mill to have it spun. There's a mill in Michigan called Stonehenge, and a few years ago, Ralph Lauren, one of his staff members, stumbled upon them, and they wound up spinning the yarn for the Winter Olympic sweater. So I kind of thought if the wool was good enough for Ralph Lauren, if that job was good enough for him, it was probably good enough for us. Lots of folks have thought the same. They're very, very busy. And so we have an agreement with them. But we wanted this wool that Mary cares about so much. She really, truly loves her sheep. They are not considered an organic flock, but they are treated as though they are organic, given only the medications that they need for health. They're not treated with anything. The wool isn't treated. So we wanted the wool to be treated very specially. So when we spoke with Deb, who was running the mill at that time, now Deb and her daughter Jody are running the mill, we asked for a 3-ply wool or 3-ply yarn because we felt as though it was going to be rounder. Those extra plies make a rounder yarn. It sort of evens out the difference in a ply. So we have a nice round yarn that gives really good stitch definition, we think. Shows cables well. It does well with color work. And we didn't want it to be too heavy because although I'm wearing a heavy worsted weight philosopher's sweater, which I put on as one of the first sweaters that I knit and sort of drew me into knitting as an adult, it's a heavy sweater and I don't wear it a lot. And truthfully, it doesn't fit that well any longer, but the love of color and the love of making sweaters, we wanted this to be a sweater yarn. So we have a 3-ply sport spun for us. Initially, we would get it back in cones, and you can see the yarn here on a cone, and we would wind it off in the yardage that we needed to put together in kits or to create in skeins. And decided pretty quickly that that was a lot of labor that we would happily allow the mill to do for us. So now we have it, we purchase it in 250-yard measured skeins. And when it comes to us, it's still pretty compacted. You can see that yarn is pretty tightly twisted there. Here's that same wool from the same batch. You can see the twists a little bit more clearly in there after it's been washed. So a little bit of oil gets on the wool. There's still some lanolin in the wool when it's spun. quite a process to get from raw fleece to spun yarn. It's washed, it's combed, it goes through a picker. So all of like the little vegetable matter, they try to get as much of that out as they can. It goes through a machine to turn into roving. It looks like taffy pouring out of a machine. And then it's spun into, it's pin drafted so that it's a much thinner bit of yarn or wool. And then it's a single, so a very thin ply of yarn. And then those plies are put together. I just happened to notice this week that Deb and Jody are putting together a tour of the mill videos, which are great. If you go to their Facebook page, you can sort of get a tour of that. But I thought it would be interesting for us to take a look at some of that machinery in action. So if you don't mind, I'll
for
sort of
it. Yeah.
the video as they go along. Jody talks about the wool that she's spinning and her feelings about it, but I think the machinery is pretty interesting to take a look at. All right, so what you can see behind Jody, she's pointing out the machines. That machine in the far area of the mill there, that's spinning single. So you can see that pin drafted fiber over her shoulder goes up and over her head and is spun into a very thin yarn. A single would be like a Noro yarn, that it doesn't have anything twisted against it. So it's just a little bit of twist to hold it together to give it some strength. And the more plies that get spun together, the stronger the yarn is. And in just a second, she's going to walk over and show you. This is the skeiner. So that is set to create skeins of yarn that is set to be measured. And sometimes they're measured. Some customers don't ask for it to be measured. And in this picture here, you can see the bobbins of those singles that get kind of threaded through some tensioning devices and then twisted together into a plied yarn. I think she's making a 2-ply yarn here. I think she said it was for Why Not Fibers, who's another Michigan dyer and friend of ours. The machine that she's pointing to here, she's taking that bit of taffied, extruded wool, and she's putting it through the pin drafter so that it's a more regular amount of yarn, so that when it goes through to create that initial single, it's a little bit easier for the machine. And she's got some opinions, of course, about what yarn she likes best and what yarn gives the machines trouble. And so she's sharing that there. But you can see that the machinery is pretty significant. So actually, Stonehenge, for a while, they were building machinery. Deb's husband was doing some of the design of that. So a lot of mills use their machinery. And again, we thought if it was good enough for Ralph Lauren, we thought it was good enough for us. And they do a great job. But because they do a great job, there's quite a bit of a wait. So the wool that was shorn from Mary's flock in the spring of last year in March is still sitting in storage, waiting for Deb and Jody to be ready for that to spin. You might know them from they have a yarn company, Stonehenge Shepherd's Wool is their. And they've they've had to shift their business model because of supply chains and not being able to get their solid wool that they dyed. But their shepherd's wool is primarily merino. So I talked about the 3 different colors of the wool. I have here, this is what that silver looks like spun up. It's a little bit darker than you might think by the time it's all cleaned up and spun. Here's that black wool, and then the white wool. So we have a natural gradient just with the different colors of wool that come directly from the sheep, which we think is pretty special. And we try to use those colors as best we can naturally, but you can imagine that trying to put color on top of that black wool or even on top of the silver wool gets tricky. So as we considered, well, what can we do to create something that's going to show off colors nicely? We had a beautiful palette that Carla started dyeing. When Carla decided not to dye any longer and went out of business, the project came up solely to me. And if you have ever dyed wool, you know that it is a challenging job. It is hard work. And I do not have the space in my tiny home to make that happen. Nor was I willing to take something on top of my full-time job. So because the fiber community is a small and friendly community, and we liked the idea of supporting friends and supporting others, we reached out to a couple of friends who were dyers and asked if they could each dye a portion of the palette. And we focused on what they did best to be able to come up with a rainbow of colors that made good sense for us. So we started doing that, and I have a couple of things here. This has not been blocked, but we are Lions fans here in Michigan. So we have a Lions hat that I used somebody else's pattern, but you can see it uses, some of the dyed colors in here along with that natural white. This hat here uses that green is kind of screaming at us. But there's some gray and some of that natural black that really looks brown in the natural state. So we started putting together some colors that made good sense and worked with those and thought, I wonder what it would look like if Deb were to put through that pin drafting machine. What if she were to
Mhm.
blend the yarn? What if she
Mhm.
were to take a certain amount of the white and a certain amount of that natural black yarn, which we call Mary's Lamb, because that true black is only going to come from that first shearing of the black sheep. So I wonder what that would look like. I wonder what that might be like. So we had her do that for the first time 2 years ago. So this is actually a blend of about 80% of the white wool and about
Oh.
20% of the black wool to get that. We call it dusk.
Mhm.
And you can see how it's just a little lighter than
Mhm.
that gray wool. So now we've got an even more interesting gradient, but that takes colors so beautifully. It gives them a little bit more of a heathered look. And we had such a small batch of that. And we sold most of that. And by the time we realized how well it was selling, we had already shipped off the next batch of wool to Mary. Or to Deb and Jody at Stonehenge. So we were already thinking about, well, what could we do that's different? What could we do that's more interesting? So the last batch of wool that we got back from the mill, we thought, well, what would it be like if we had her do a marl? What if we took one
Mhm.
ply of the natural silver and two plies of the white, and so it's still a 3-ply yarn, but it has a little bit more interest to it. And that we just have gotten all of that back from the two dyers that we're working with. Sarah and Meg are the dyers that we're working with. Sarah is Fiber Story is her business, and Meg, her business is Fairy Godmother Dye Works. You might have known her from Twisted Fiber Arts a few years ago, but she's doing some things on her own. So the two of them are doing great work. Um, I told you I'm not a dyer, but I did use a little bit of indigo this summer at that same festival that I was mentioning.
Nice.
So you can see just some very rudimentary indigo dyeing that I was playing with.
So
You can
fun.
see that indigo on the natural white,
Mhm.
on that dusk color here, and then here on that marled color. We're calling this sheepish because it's two different colors of the sheep's wool. So we
Mhm.
thought that was a clever name. Um, so you can see that it takes this, these were all put into that indigo at the same time for the same amount of time, and you come up with something that's really quite interesting. Um, so we think the yarn is pretty special because there's a woman shepherd that raises the sheep. There is a woman-owned business in the mill that creates the yarn itself. We've had 4 different women as the dyers for us at this point, so it's touching more women's hands
Mhm.
in that regard. And we are a big fan of supporting small businesses and um, helping one another. It's like I mentioned, it's a small community, the fiber community is. So we just have really worked hard to make sure that everybody's work is valued and honored. The colors all work together pretty nicely. This is a piece of a sweater that I'm working on. So it'll be striped starting from the bottom going up to the top. And the colors, I spent a lot of time obsessing over which order the colors should be in, and finally just put them in a bag and pulled them out.
No
Um,
way.
Hey, so
Well, it worked out great.
um,
Amazing.
yeah, so we really have worked hard with the dyers to make sure that the colors that they're creating for us really work well with one another. And sometimes they look at me and think I'm asking them to do a weird combination of colors because their colors might not work with each of the colors they're dyeing. But when it all comes together, it makes a really beautiful um, rainbow of colors. So that if you're a warm person, there's plenty of warm choices, and if you're a cool person, there's plenty of cool color choices. Um, and we think it all works together, and then adding some of our better selling colors onto that marled sheepish base this year,
Mhm.
it really creates a really beautiful spectrum that you could do a fade really nicely, all with the same color, but
Mhm.
sort of shifting things up. I think about our loose strife and our, can we just call it purple? Both of those colors with that sheepish base, all of a sudden you've got 4 different colors, but they're really based just on 2 dyes.
Mhm.
Um, it's been interesting for our dyers because most indie dyers work with um, superwash yarn, and that takes color differently. And
Mhm.
so for them to work with something that's a non-superwash wool gives them the opportunity to expand their craft, to learn something a little bit different. And we are thankful that it doesn't really compete with the yarns that they sell. So if we're at a festival together, um, we're not fighting with our dyers for the same dollars. We're sharing that space, and there's something for everybody in that. So we are excited about kind of pushing the boundaries and kind of pushing the edges of things. Um, I do like secrets and sharing secrets. So I'll share a secret at the end. But what I also think is important is for us to hear from where this yarn starts. So Mary, who is the shepherd, often in our booths at festivals, will say, well, we have a friend named Mary, and she had a little lamb. And
Yep.
that's where the story starts. She is just a kind soul. Her farm is um, a small farm. Like I said, she only has a flock of, a few sheep. By the time things are skirted, we get about 100 pounds of wool each year. So it's not a lot of wool. It really is a small batch, artisanal bit of yarn. But a few years ago, when we first started this, a friend of ours in Michigan did an interview with us and then also interviewed Mary. And I just think it's fun to see her with her sheep. So I'd like to share that as well, if I can.
Let's meet the sheep.
Meet the sheep.
And I really never paid a lot of attention to the wool before, other than, it's wool. And I'd like to get use, because I believe in permaculture, using everything.
Right.
It was just something that just went in a bag and went away, and they sent you a check a year later after they decide what it was worth. So, but as I noticed the wool getting better, I thought, oh, somebody should use this wool.
Right.
And I would shear the ewes myself, and sometimes people come help me catch them, and maybe take a bundle of wool and trade. And then a few years back, I got a blue-faced Leicester ram. And that just, I could tell that the wool just, everything changed.
So 46 years later, you're able to now find a way after all this time to actually make money off the wool, like, and have it
Yes.
be something that's a viable part of your business that wasn't before.
Absolutely.
And how does that feel? I mean, to have
It just makes my heart sing.
yeah,
It makes me feel so good that someone who has found a way to do that part that I couldn't seem to do. That Carla and Tanya, she was the one who started it. I said, there's got to be a way for you to make wool. I mean,
Yeah.
money on your wool.
yeah.
So Mary just is just a kind, gentle soul, and we're really thrilled to work with her and support her farm and to be a part of what Deb and Jody are doing at Stonehenge, being able to infuse some money into our indie dyer community so that they don't have to purchase the wool and sit on the wool and hope that they pick the right colors to sell. Unfortunately, that's where my part comes in, right? That I sit on the wool and bring it to festivals. But I feel so good about supporting others in the community and ensuring that that happens properly it really is a joy for me to be a part of it. And we do really believe that everybody who's touched this wool has such good intentions and is so good at what they do that all of that energy, and I know it sounds a little maybe hokey and a little woo-woo, but we feel like that energy goes into that wool, and that the folks who purchase this wool and make something, that they sort of join our efforts in that and become part of this collective. And so we always want to say we invite you to be part of Team MayBea Crafted, and really share in that. So I am super proud of it. I do think it is a special wool. It's different than a lot of the wools that are on the market, especially because so many dyers are, working to do something that's special, but they don't have that connection of community infused into the yarn. So we do like that. I did say I would share something that's a secret.
Before you do, Tanya, can you turn your volume up a little bit after the video? I can hear you, but you're a little bit softer suddenly.
Let me do that.
Otherwise, it'll be like you're whispering your secret.
I am kind of whispering my secret.
Okay, this is great. This is great. Yeah.
Okay. Are we good?
Yes.
All right. So I do have a secret. We had hoped to have this back in time, but it's just taken a little bit longer in development. So I would say probably within the next 2 or 3 months. I mentioned that Meg was formerly of Twisted Fiber Arts. She has taken, remember I mentioned that white wool and the dusk wool, and she's turned those into gradient.
Oh, beautiful.
There's on the white. This is the same color on the dusk. So you can just see how different the same colors, and I know it's wound in different directions, but still you get the idea of how different that is. She's doing 2 different colors for us on 2 different bases in very limited quantities. The rainbow was her favorite. I let her pick her favorite colors to dye. So that rainbow color, and here it is on the dusk. So you can see how those colors sort of shift through. That's just a 1 skein project. It's called the Just One More Bit cowl. Which, if you're looking for a 1 skein project to try out the Welcome Home yarn, it's really intended to just really use every last little bit of your precious yarn from that shrine of sacred yarn that you have at home, and has just enough difference in those stitch patterns that I think it's a nice one to try out the Welcome Home yarn and see what you think of it. I think there's a lime green, the first spring color of the same cowl at the shop. So you can see it in a solid. We haven't shared this gradient with anyone yet, except Emily, with you. And so that's something that probably if we are at any winter shows or spring shows, you'll see that gradient popping up.
Oh, that is simply beautiful. I actually feel like a gradient like that would look really beautiful in any of the pressed flowers patterns, like the hat. I think there's a cowl, and then you can make a really special one because we call it like farm to table yarn, basically the type of yarn that you make, but the story that you have is so it's pretty unique compared to a lot of the trunk shows that we do.
Like I said, we feel very proud of being able to connect a bunch of really talented people and then be the ones that get to interact with customers and see how much they really appreciate it. So,
I'd love. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I tell people I'm the shepherd of the process, right? Like project management doesn't sound quite as nice and romantic as shepherding the yarn to market, right?
That's probably why so few yarns like this exist, right? And I'd love to talk about a couple of the things that I really like about the yarn. Just because String Theory is a pretty mission-based yarn shop. And so many things about the MayBea Crafted yarn story fits so well in line with our mission. We love that it's a completely closed loop Michigan yarn right in the Midwest. And so that's really special. But I love that this is basically diverting wool that would potentially otherwise be wasted. We've heard of that happening. We have one other yarn that's kind of a similar story, but it's in Spain. Not, not in Michigan, not in the Midwest. And so I think it's already it's not a commercial farm that Mary has. It's like a small farm. And you were able to find each other and connect in order to use every little bit, of these sheep. I'm also I hadn't really thought too much about the cross between the Romney and the BFL. But now that I think of it, I've never seen it before. And I can say I've touched and squished the yarn, and it's really, really soft and fantastic.
Yeah. So when the last batch that we did not purchase from Mary, because it went to the co-op, they do samples of the yarn and they provide a report to the shepherd. And I don't remember what the micron was, but it was approaching a merino fineness. So, and they take those samples from everywhere. And it was unskirted wool that was sent. So, we can't say it's as soft as merino because it's not, but it certainly feels great to us. And in every step of the process, when we were first sampling with it, we found we liked it for all sorts of different applications.
Mm-hmm.
You can see this is one of the first samples that I knit. You can see it's got great stitch definition, and then there's a little bit of mosaic at the cuff. And so, it just shows stitch definition really well.
So question, some of those the natural colors that you have, were those included in our trunk show, the ones that are undyed and just sort of the neutral colors because we have a full rainbow of color.
And you have the neutrals, and you have some of the undyed sheepish as well.
Very cool.
If you need more of that, we can send more of that your way as well. The colors, maybe not. It depends on the color, because we take all of what we have and we hold a few skeins of natural back that we think that we're going to be able to sell. But when a color is gone, it's gone. And the dyers do a really nice job of making dye lots as similar as possible, but it is a hand dyed yarn. Artists are touching this at every step of the way. So, vary your skein, alternate your skeins if you're doing a solid color project. But
that's a great tip. That's a great tip. And I'm reminded of a trunk show we did earlier this year with Goth Farm Yarn. They are based in Austin, Texas, and it's undyed yarn. All of it is undyed. And when we were working through what a trunk show would look like with all of this 100% undyed yarn, Monica, who owns that business, said, it's a good idea actually to pair up with maybe another indie dyer to do 2 trunk shows at once, because really, we love so many of us love the idea of an undyed, the pure yarn, right? Getting as close to the sheep as possible. But we also, most of us do actually like color too.
Right.
And so this is like the best of both worlds. It's indie dyers dyeing the small batch wool, but you also have the opportunity to be as close to the sheep as possible with the neutrals. So that's really neat. And then the final thing I wanted to point out is that all of us in the store, as we were unboxing your yarn, were really blown away by the samples that you sent us. Especially, you sent us a whole bunch of hats. And this is a great reason, if you are local, to stop into the store to see the hats in person, because clearly you have a knack for color work.
Well, I love all the colors. I love all the colors.
Yeah, because we have so many fantastic color work hats, and really for some of them it would just be a two skein project. And so that's sport weight yarn. It's going to be very, very warm, but it's not going to be your head's on fire. And we're thinking that these are just really great gifts.
Absolutely. A number of the patterns of the samples that I sent are patterns that I wrote as well. So there's on most of the samples, if not all, there's a little QR code. So if you're in the shop looking at things, it'll take you right to the Ravelry page. So if if Ravelry gives you problems, maybe don't use the QR code. If Ravelry doesn't give you problems, go ahead and scan that. But it'll take you right to the landing page for that. And I'm pretty sure String Theory does an in-store Ravelry purchase. So you can, that's just another way to support String Theory as well, which we think is pretty great. But a lot of them will do, like, you can reverse the colors and knit a hat and a cowl from the same pattern. So the hat patterns that I've written go from small infant to extra large adult and include a cowl. So you can have that matching but not matchy look for some things. So
that's great. Yeah. And that's like, to me, this is the time to be planning those projects. This is the time to be doing those projects. And so, like, the time is now to come in, get this amazing three ply yarn. I also love that it's 3-ply. I love that it's sport weight. More and more of our base of our customers and community members are looking for non-superwash yarn. So
it's a trend in the industry that we think we might have just been a little bit ahead of the curve for that, right?
You called it.
I will say though, it is a chunkier sport weight. So if you are looking at patterns, looking at something that is a light DK would probably also work. One of the sweaters that I sent, it's the Verner's cardigan with all the different colored stripes in it. It's a little coffee bean. It might actually be but it's the adult version of that. I did mess with the gauge a little bit on that. That's written for a worsted weight yarn, but I love that pattern so much. And I thought it was a great way to show off all the colors. So yeah, it's the more you play with the colors, the more you want to play with the colors. And if you're a new knitter, and most of the patterns that I write are color work patterns just because I enjoy that process. I'm going to forget the name of it now. I'm going to text you the name of it later because I can't remember exactly what the name of the pattern is, but there's a pattern that I use for teaching that is very simple, short repeats that you can kind of work through. I don't think I have a version of it here.
Well, we can figure it out. We'll share it with everybody, all of the pattern names.
Yeah.
Tomorrow.
Excellent.
So yeah, the samples are lovely. The yarn is great. You've got a fantastic, compelling story. And this is yarn that is good for women, good for our community, good for the environment, good for the sheep, good for you, good for everybody.
There's a local, well, it's quite large, but Zingerman's Delicatessen is in Ann Arbor, and they talk about a triple bottom line: people, planet, and profit. That they look at those three things as they're working through their business model. And there's been a number of small businesses in the area that have taken that on. And I sort of feel like that is part of like my morals before I even had words to put to it, that we are supporting all of the people that touch the yarn. We're supporting the yarn stores. Most of what we do are trunk shows and fiber festivals. I don't sell a lot online because it's hard for me with a full-time job to make that happen. So we support local yarn stores when we do trunk shows. And that's one more way that we're adding primarily women's businesses in there, because most of our yarn stores are owned by women. So people, the planet, you heard Barry talk about permaculture and using every little bit in her farm. So that's the planet. And then profit, of course, we want everybody to make a little bit of money so that our dyers can stay in business, or local yarn stores can stay in business, so that we have these resources available to us.
All right. So when I knit my MayBea Crafted hat and cowl set for a Christmas gift for my sister-in-law, I'll also have this wonderful story to tell her about how this is going to look cool and keep you warm, but also how it's good for the planet and good for everybody. So we really appreciate that, Tanya. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with, or should we wrap it up here?
I don't. I just hope that I hope people embrace the yarn, they embrace the story. And I'm not super active on social media these days, but I love when people tag me with photos of their work. A friend from camp is working on a Rhinebeck sweater with all of the rainbow colors right now, and it's absolutely amazing. So it's fun to see those things.
And we'll keep an eye out for those gradients sometime in the next.
I'm going to say a couple of months. And
6 months. Yeah.
yeah, I'm hopeful that they are in hand before Christmas. Meg is accustomed to getting yarn on cones, and so the prep for that is pretty tricky, but the way that she shifts through color is unlike anyone I've ever seen. I mean, there's not a stark line. It just really
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
shifts from color to color. So those will be a little bit pricier just because of her labor to make these happen, but I think worth it.
Absolutely. What a treasure. Thank you so much, Tanya. Have a great night. So just a reminder to folks that the trunk show with MayBea Crafted started on Saturday. So we have another, I believe, 2.5 weeks with your yarn, but then we have to send it back. So if you want to pick some up, you got to shop early on stringtheoryyarncompany.com or in person, and I would do that as soon as possible because some of the colors are definitely going to sell out. But I'll thank you again, Tanya, and we will catch you some other time.
All right, thanks, Emily.
Take
Say hi to
care.
everybody in the shop for me.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.